So
Mm.
I think a lot of women pick up the message that either they are doing something wrong or something is wrong.
Midlife can be a challenging time for women when it comes to their relationship with food. Our weight and shape often change, and social media doesn't seem to allow us to age gracefully. I was recently shocked to learn that the incidence of eating disorders increases around the menopause. So, advance warning, we are discussing that in this video. Whilst I have degrees in medicine, psychology, and nutrition, this is not my area of expertise. So I sat down for a chat with dietitian Lorelei Sturm to find out more. By the end of this video, you'll know how to spot disordered eating, how this differs from an eating disorder, and why we should stop complimenting people if we think they've lost weight. I met Lorelei as she's a fellow over 50s female YouTuber. And like me, she made a career pivot later in life, so we've got a lot in common. You must go check out her channel because she is incredibly knowledgeable and eloquent. She used to be a professional actor and her videos are excellent and you'll learn a lot. I'll link her channel below. Lorelei currently works as a dietitian in private practice, but has spent a significant proportion of her career working in residential treatment centres for people recovering from eating disorders, and this informs her practice today. I started by asking her about the term disordered eating and how this differs from an eating disorder, how our bodies change in midlife, and how we normalise that.
Yeah, so an eating disorder is considered a mental health condition. So, as a registered dietitian, I cannot diagnose an eating disorder. It is not within my scope of practice to diagnose.
Mm.
But what I can diagnose is a disordered eating pattern. And I do that with a lot of my clients. And so, a disordered eating pattern is probably like things like, you know, meals being skipped or long periods of time where someone's not eating, maybe an overall imbalance in their diet or missing like complete food groups or maybe eating a lot of foods all at once. Something that just looks a little chaotic and inconsistent is often considered a disordered eating pattern or disordered eating.
Mm.
The thing is, not everybody who has disordered eating also has an eating disorder. So, for example, sometimes I'll work with women who they're not eating breakfast and they're barely eating lunch. And it's just because they're really, really busy. But that's not an eating disorder. It is still a disordered eating pattern. So there is a
Mm.
distinction between those two. However, generally a disordered eating pattern, if someone does have an eating disorder, usually they will also have a disordered eating pattern. Does that
Yeah.
make
So
sense?
So sometimes the disordered eating pattern could be just due to stuff getting in the way. Like you're really
Yep.
busy at work and you've got to
Yep.
get kids to school and you just
Yep.
don't have time to eat your breakfast.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you sort of answered my next question slightly there, which was what are the sort of warning signs that you look out for? So
Yeah.
obviously you said skipping meals, cutting out entire food groups. I'm guessing carbohydrates is probably the most common thing to
That's
cut
the
out.
most current one. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Um,
Um, I think what
Anything
kind
else?
of puts it over the edge to more of a true eating disorder, like what I noticed again, is more like an obsession with food, with eating. It might be like constant thinking about food. It might be like a real fear of food. It's very often tied to a fear of weight gain or a drive to lose weight. Not
Mm.
always, but the majority of eating disorders are very much tied to drive for thinness or a fear of weight gain. But then it is just like people thinking about food constantly, people obsessively counting calories. It can be, I mean, so yeah, it can show up in a lot of ways. And some of the behaviors that might show up would be things like, missing out on social occasions that involve food, eating alone or in secret, hiding food. Some of the
Mm.
actual behaviors might include like things like binging or purging for some people, but those are things that sometimes like first of all, an individual themselves would know they're doing that, but someone else might not know that they're doing
Mm.
that. So some of the outward signs might vary from person to person. But I think it is just like everything kind of taken to a further extreme, along with a lot of like fear based concerns, anxiety, real stress over food, fear of being around food, fear of losing control around food, those sorts of
Mm.
things as well.
Mm. I mean, you alluded to the fact that a lot of this is driven by a fear of weight gain, and which leads me nicely on to my next question, which is obviously around and after menopause, it's very common for women's weight to change and for
Mhm.
women's shape to change, specifically starting to get sort of fat moving from bum and thighs to tummy. I guess one of my questions is, how do we, as sort of nutrition professionals, sort of normalize the fact that it's normal for the female body to change as it ages, and it's not realistic to be the size and shape we were at 25, at 55, which is quite obviously, I appreciate that's quite a difficult question.
Yeah, no. But I actually think it's like I also think like part of it is like kind of normalizing that this is tough. Like for example, a lot of women in their 50s might have spent the last 30 years getting used to a body that they didn't love in their 20s, right? So we've spent all this time being like, okay, fine, I accept my body, and then it changes again. And so we're
Mm,
sort of faced with this like kind of just a resurgence perhaps of like a lot of body insecurities that maybe we actually, I mean, some people have them their whole lives, but like some
mm,
people maybe you haven't really felt that way since you were in your teens or your 20s. So I don't think it's surprising that it's like what is going on here. I think the normalization pattern though is like, how do we normalize that? Like that is tough. um, just because I do think there's a lot of messaging out there that if your body changes, there must be something wrong. So
mm,
I think a lot of women pick up the message that either they are doing something wrong or something is wrong. And sometimes I will talk to people and I'm like, what if nothing is wrong? Like, what if
mm.
there isn't anything wrong? Um, I definitely talk to a lot of people who, yeah, maybe we can make some changes. Like maybe there are some dietary changes that can happen, and so then you feel like you're doing your best, your diligence, you're taking care of yourself, and that doesn't always have an impact on people's weight. And so these are really tough conversations to have with people, to
Mm,
be perfectly honest, because we don't really live in a society that has said, oh, yeah, that's okay.
mm.
I don't know. I feel like there was a time when it was kind of just like the normal thing. Like, yeah, women did gain weight after a certain point, and that was just sort of part of the deal. Um, Maybe not. Maybe because I wasn't in that age bracket before, I didn't
Yeah, maybe we
realize.
just weren't aware
I'm
of
just,
it
yeah, I
because,
notice it
yeah.
now because that's where I am. But also, I think that it's interesting in some ways that women don't have the same always, and sometimes they do, but the same reaction to like, oh, my hair is graying. Oh, my skin is getting a little bit more wrinkly. Sometimes we're like, let's, go with the gray, accept the wrinkles. But I think the body shape and size is like much harder to kind of get down to. But I think if we compare it to that, like, is your skin the same as it was when you were 20? Why
Mm,
would you expect every other part of you to be the same as it was when you
mm.
were 20? Um,
I then asked her about the role played by social media in driving disordered eating and how we view our bodies.
I would agree that social media does play a role. I think that there is a lot more information out there. I think there are a
Mm,
lot more voices out there who are like midlife voices, which is sort of a good thing. But I do think, well, we know that the algorithms play to the extremes. And so we do tend to see things that are very extreme in a direction that is also probably
mm.
very unrealistic for most people. But that's becoming normal. Like it seems like the extreme should be normal, and it's just not for most people. So I think that is the biggest, is like a very big challenge, is to sort of acknowledge that yeah, there are different genetic ways in which people will age. Like again,
Mm.
even like with hair, like, well, I don't have a lot of gray hair. That's genes. There's nothing that I have done for that to be the case. Whereas I have people who are my same age who have a lot more gray hair than I do. That's genes. So
Yeah.
aging is gonna vary from person to person. And I do think that sometimes we see the people who have gone in like the extreme one direction. That's who we see.
Before this interview, Lorelei sent me some research on disordered eating in midlife, and something caught my eye: the concept of muscularity orientated disordered eating. This is a preoccupation with that very lean, muscular look, which requires large muscles and a very low body fat percentage. The paper describes it as a predominantly male phenomenon, so I shared my observation that perhaps it's starting to affect women too. But again, my observation is that same thing is occurring with women. There seems to be a
Yeah.
lot more content around very strong women with muscles, which is great, but combined with that very lean look,
Yeah.
which is something that takes a lot of work to look like that, an awful lot of
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. And I think that is the truth of it is that, and I do sometimes try to talk to my clients about this of like, you know, you are getting nutrition advice from a bodybuilder online, like, because that is what people are hearing. Like, well, this is what I do to look like this. And
Mm,
I will say, are you a bodybuilder? Like, is that your ambition? Is that your intention? Because the way in which they have to approach their regime is in, intense and extreme. And to
mm,
be perfectly honest, most of the behaviors are what most would consider disordered. Now,
mm,
I can't, you know, diagnose anyone online. They are not my clients. But I do think that I do sometimes see situations where I'm like, oh yeah, that's not okay. Like that
mm,
behavior isn't okay. And yet it is becoming, it sounds mainstream. Like, oh, this is what I do. This is what I do. Do what I do to be
mm,
like me. Um, and it's like, no, 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 please don't, please don't. So I would agree that a lot of that is out there. Um,
mm,
and this is the other piece of it that because I think, you know, I think it's kind of, there is an alignment of like this orthorexia idea of like, this is a health behavior. And I think that there tends to be a thing of like, if it's a healthy behavior, like lifting weights, yeah, we do say, hey, women in your midlife, it's great if you're doing some resistance training. It's a health focused behavior. I think we continue to hear the messaging over and over, and we think, oh, I should be doing more. And we double down on things that maybe are healthy, but there isn't any balance if we take it to the extreme. And so
yeah, yeah.
I think that's really hard to prevent because almost
Mm,
any message, if someone says, okay, I'm going to just take that one thing and run with it, it can be taken to an extreme. And I do think that, like, in the space of eating disorders, this is something that we know some people are more prone to this than others. So, because eating disorders, again, are kind of a mental health diagnosis, not everybody exposed to, you know, certain content will develop an eating disorder. Not everybody who tries to lose weight will develop an eating disorder. But for people who are more prone to, those things can be really strong triggers.
Moving on, I asked whether we as Gen X women were still carrying the mental scars of the 1990s. Our mums grew up in the 60s when there was a tremendous pressure to be thin. So we grew up with our mums on frequent diets, scared to eat something deemed naughty, and we witnessed that. Plus, women's weight was critiqued on reality TV shows where auditioning female contestants were told they needed to lose weight to be successful. And if there's been a resurgence of the thin is in messaging, now we have drugs like Manjaro and Ozempic.
Yeah, I mean, that is a little bit my perspective as well. And I wouldn't say like it's hard and fast true. I would say everybody has a different experience, but like I remember the Slim Fast diet for sure. I mean, did I try it? Yeah. Yeah, I tried it at some point. Did it work? No, didn't do anything for me, right? Right. But I think like the Special K diet and the low fat craze. And I think, you know, I do, I mean, I definitely know a lot of people who dieted in the 90s. And I think there maybe wasn't as much awareness about the rebound effect of dieting that most people tend to experience. Uh, and so it was sort of just like the thing you were supposed to do if you didn't like the body that you were in. I
Mm,
would say that it seems like over like in decades since then, there's been a little bit more softening around that, and we've seen a little bit more of body size changing, like more variety in body
mm,
sizes. But I think in really recent times, and so this could be a combination, right? I think because of, particularly because GLP-1s have like shown up now, there is all of a sudden like a quote unquote easy way to lose weight. By the way, it's not easy, and these are not for everyone. I do actually work with a fair number of clients on GLP-1s. Very mixed feelings, we'll not get into here. But at the same time, I do think that a lot of women are seeing their friends and people around them go on these medications. So they may not want to go on the medication, but then they feel like, so I will just replicate that result in my own way. And they're not, it's not so much like, well, I'm not going to go on that medication. I'm not going to worry about my body. It's more, I'm not going to go on the medication, but I still need my body shape to be what it would be if I were on the medication.
Yeah. And I suppose the other thing that's changed since the 90s is we know more about genetics, i.e., we know what a large part genetics and
Yeah,
genetic makeup plays in somebody's weight.
right.
And that we could all eat exactly the same and work out exactly the same. We'd still look different because.
Yeah.
Finally, I asked Lorelei about how we should approach the situation if we think a friend or loved one might be displaying signs of an eating disorder.
This is a really good and fair question. I mean, honestly, I do think that people who feel like they're going down the road of having an eating disorder, a lot of times they know. Um, so, well, okay, so let me start off here. In general, I would say we don't generally want to comment on people's weight or people's like what's on people's plate. Like that's kind
Yeah,
of none
yeah.
of our business in general. So like if it's a stranger and you're like, "Oh, that person's really thin. Maybe I should say something." No, don't. That's not your place. Kind of period here.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I
yeah.
would agree that like if it's somebody that you know very well and that you really care about and you do think something is going on, approach with compassion and try to leave behind the judgment. I know that can be really, really hard, but as I said, people generally do know if something's going on and they might be open to talking about it. But if you put them on the defensive, they're going to defend the behavior, and that actually
Mm,
can tend to ingrain it more in their pattern of thinking. So be compassionate. Honestly, I do this with clients sometimes. They have come to me as a dietitian, so they know I'm going to be assessing. But even so, I try to be very delicate if I notice something. We've gone through what they eat in a day. And usually I'll say, hey, do you mind if I make an observation? And I try to ask permission. So I think
mm,
that's a good thing to do. And then usually I'll try to approach it with curiosity, say, like, hey, I've noticed this. Tell me a little bit more about that.
mm.
So I think, like, again, it's tough because these are skills that, like, almost like you feel like you have to be a therapist of some sort and approach in a very delicate way. But I think if you can just be really compassionate and help someone out and know probably you're not going to be able, if they really are struggling with something and they open up to you, you're not going to be able to help them. They might be able to find help with a professional.
Yeah.
But if you sort of end up making them feel ashamed or guilty, it might shut the door for them talking to you again. And so I know that's hard. I really do. I know how hard that is. But yeah, I think it's a challenging situation. And most people, if they are actually in an eating disorder, like there's stuff going on. They're probably very stressed. They're probably very worried. They're probably, there's a lot of other things going on. So I don't know if that's a
No, that's excellent advice. I mean, yeah, ultimately, I mean, I don't work with people with eating disorders because I'm
yeah,
not appropriately qualified. I would
yeah,
always send someone in the direction of a professional. It's just sort of how, yeah, no, that's really good advice for anyone who might be worried about someone in their
yeah.
life. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. I guess I know another thing that I just kind of wanted to throw this in here. When it comes to like, we talked earlier on about like signs of eating disorders, and I guess I think there is sort of this general idea out there that eating disorder equals extreme weight loss, low body weight. And in my experience, it does not. People in all size
Mm,
bodies can have eating disorders. And I think that this is one of the challenges, particularly with diagnosis, even on the medical level, is that oftentimes weight loss is praised, particularly for people who, I mean, it's not usually praised if somebody's already underweight, then that those people are maybe going to be addressed a little bit more. But if somebody is naturally in a larger body and they lose a little bit of weight, that weight is going to be praised
mm,
and nobody's going to ask about how it happened.
mm.
So I do think a lot of people that I see are potentially under eating and still in large bodies. And I think it can be really difficult for them to get help because there just isn't really a pathway. And even when it comes to like symptoms of under eating at the doctor's office, and this might actually apply for women in their 40s and 50s, a lot of times symptoms include things like low energy, brain fog, even loss of menstrual cycle, and then other things maybe like slow digestion or like hair loss. But like almost all of these can be attributed to other things.
Menopause. Yeah,
Yeah,
basically everything that the menopause gives you. So
yeah,
yeah, which is going to make diagnosis very, very challenging. Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, you're right. I mean, the phrase that immediately sprang to mind is people going, "Oh, you look well. Have you lost weight?" And
yeah,
it's that
yeah,
validation, isn't it? You're looking good,
yeah.
and that continues sort of validation of somebody's choices.
Yeah. Honestly, I think when going back to the like, what can we do to normalize? I honestly think if we got to the point where we stopped commenting on people's weight, like that could be huge. Like where we
Yeah.
stopped complimenting people for perceived weight loss.
Mm,
Especially, you have no idea what's going on with that person, right?
mm,
Like,
mm.
but I've definitely worked with people for whom compliments from others have perpetuated their eating disorder because they
Yeah.
have been losing weight. And so that always breaks my heart a little bit
Mm.
when I see that it's like they're actually getting validation for something that is definitely leading to harm if they don't find a way to reverse course. So that's something that I think like, could we start the trend of like, let's
Yeah, I
just
was going to say that's a very positive
yeah,
note to end on. If we all stopped commenting on weight, life would be a far better place,
it would.
and
Yeah.
social media would be an awful lot kinder and happier and more positive. Well, let's,
Yay.
yay, we've changed the world. That's a very good place to end, I think. Thank you
Good,
very
good.
much. So I hope you enjoyed this video, something a little bit different for my channel. I'll let the YouTube algorithm decide what to show you next. It'll appear here and I'll see you there.